Yeah, 20 years later, that's an interesting thing. I mean, these things do have an afterlife that you don't imagine when you're doing them. It's kind of a throwaway medium when you're starting out and you're making these low-budget horror pictures that you don't know if anybody's going to go see. And then to have somebody, come up and say, well, what do you think of it today? After 20 years is, it's amazing that anybody cares. I mean, it was a modern movie in 1980, and time has been kind to it, I think, but the movies that they make today are different. The guy who started the Wolfman stuff was a writer named Kurt Siodmak, who wrote the screenplay for the Wolfman in 1941. And he came up with a lot of lore about full moons and wolfbane and a whole bunch of stuff that became sort of accepted as the traditional stuff for werewolf movies.
Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf. Wolfbane blooms.
The Wolfman is sort of the popular culture idea of the werewolf, and people have commented on, how come his shirt is always tucked in and stuff. But, when you're a kid, you don't think about that stuff. And was a popular and neurotic enough character to reappear in several more movies, and really kind of became the prototype for the Wolfman.
I'm going now, and heaven help you.
But the genre started to thin out a little in the 70s. There was The Beast Must Die, which was a sort of whodunit werewolf picture that didn't really quite work, and also in which werewolves were played by large dogs and real wolves, which was always disappointing to me. I mean, the idea of going to see a werewolf picture and have them employ a real wolf instead of any kind of a guy in a suit or makeup was always considered cheating, because that wasn't supernatural enough. And that's certainly the way we felt when we did The Howling.
I think the essential difference is that everybody that did The Howling was familiar with the Universal films. With the Universal films, I think would only have echoed legends and tales.
It seemed like it would be more fun to try to take the myth into the 80s.
Joe picked up on the rules of the werewolf and decided that would be a strong element to structure the story.
Full moon, the silver bullet, and most of them don't want to be werewolves and don't want to be bad.
The idea that if you get bitten by a werewolf, you become one yourself is sort of, the legitimate, quote-unquote, lore. Certain werewolves, like, alpha werewolves or whatever, can change at will. But if you're a victim, if you've been bitten by a werewolf, the full moon triggers it.
Isn't that how they become a werewolf? They have to be bitten by another werewolf?
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
The clip from The Wolfman is in the movie not really as a joke. It's in there because, for one thing, it encapsulates the entire werewolf ethos. It tells you, it's the scene that explains about being a werewolf. And it also is the scene that allows you to realize, which I think was a first for this kind of movie, that the characters in the movie know as much about the subject as you do.
For a movie to take place today, it's ridiculous to think that people don't know what werewolves are or have never heard of werewolves. Of course they have, but from the movies, that's the reference.
You find if you look at some of the pictures that the lore changes based on what budget the people had to work with. In the first Hammer Dracula picture, there's a scene where Peter Cushing is speaking into a gramophone and he's talking about how unlike what people think, vampires can't change into wolves. There was a reason for that. And how they don't turn into bats either. Well, they didn't have the money, and they knew they'd do it badly, so they said, well, let's just find a reason to not do it, and let's maximize what we can do well.
We'll find out if any of Eddie's killings were on a full moon.
Hey, that's a lot of Hollywood baloney.
There's a scene with Dick Miller in this bookstore where he basically debunks every aspect of werewolf lore that we can't afford to do.
Your classic werewolf can change shape anytime it wants, day or night, whenever it takes a notion to. That's why I call them shapeshifters. I got a dozen books on it.
What we were saying was, well, this is the way it really is. This is the way what werewolves are really like. It's not the way you've seen it in the old movies. Bob Raimi and Avco Embassy, they wanted a werewolf movie. They wanted there to be some scares and some laughs. That was a bonus. That was great. But they just wanted something they could sell, and they knew it was a high concept. There hadn't been a werewolf movie in a long time, so it was, considered a very commercial idea.
I came onto The Howling late. It was originally developed by another director, a guy named Jack Conrad, who I think gets a producer credit. And he had optioned the book and written a screenplay of his own that I guess he had managed to set up at Alco Embassy, but they started to get cold feet about it. Dan Blatt was the executive producer who sort of put all this stuff together. And at a certain point, I think they, for whatever reason, decided that Jack wasn't going to direct this.
So I called him up and I said, look, we have this werewolf movie, and I think we're gonna make a change, in the directing department, and would you be interested?
I had done 1.5 movies by this point, so I mean, it wasn't exactly a great coup for them to get me. But on the other hand, I knew Bob Ramey, the guy who was running Alco Embassy at the time, because he had worked for Roger Corman as in publicity.
So this movie was initially $1.5 million, so that was a tremendous amount of money to us. But I mean, the idea of just working quickly and cheaply and being able to put a lot up on the screen for not a lot of money was something that we all learned and never forgot, working for Roger Corman.
I was taken off of the movie that I was going to do, which was Jaws 3: People Zero at Universal, which looked like it was, for various reasons, about to fall apart. And I sort of went on to The Howling, and when confronted with the screenplay, I think that it became apparent that we needed to rewrite it.
He was not crazy about the script, but he wanted to do a werewolf movie, so he said, well, if we can work on the script, I'm in.
It's based on a novel by Gary Brandner, and a lot of the themes and incidents in the movie are duplicated in the book.
Basically, we said, well, we have this book, we should try to stick fairly closely to it. And it really wasn't until John Sayles got involved that we pretty much just said, let's just throw out the book and do whatever we want, call it The Howling.
I had previously worked with John Sayles on Piranha, which I think was his first screenplay. And I suggested John, and he came up with the idea of setting the action in this sort of spa for werewolves.
John's, real big contribution was the whole idea of doing this sort of satiric commentary on self-help gurus and this guy that basically had this colony where all these werewolves were in therapy because they were obviously tortured by the fact that they were werewolves, and so he was a psychiatrist that decided to fill that niche of being the psychiatrist for the werewolf community.
Okay, tell me, doctor, how crazy am I?
I'm going to recommend that you go out to the colony for a week or two.
John was also working at the time on Alligator, which was and since both these pictures were really quite cheap, we would vie for who was going to pay to fly him out, and each company would try to figure out how to exploit him once he was out here on the dime of the other company. Whenever you'd go to visit him, to look at new pages and stuff, you'd knock on the door, you'd say, "Who is it?" And you'd say who it was, and then you'd hear, you'd be taking the paper out of the typewriter and putting the other paper in because he was really working on the other guy's picture. And I'm convinced to this day that one of the dream sequences for our picture ended up in Alligator, and vice versa. Well, the casting director for this picture was Susan Arnold, who was the son of Jack Arnold, who had directed The Incredible Shrinking Man and Creature from the Black Lagoon and a lot of other movies at Universal.
I actually went in and auditioned. I read for it. And then they couldn't find anybody to play my husband. And Chris and I were engaged at the time. Knew if I'd said, you ought to read my fiance, that was going to be the first thing that they were going to not do. So I said, I know this actor. God, what's his name? Christopher Stone. So they found him and they called him in, and he went in and read, and he got the part on his own.
Hey, I got it. First shot.
Dan called, I don't know, the next day, and I picked up the phone. He went, "Oh, Dee, I'm sorry. I was trying to get Christopher Stone. I guess I dialed the wrong number." And he said, "No, you dialed the right number." And there was this long pause, and he went, "Oh, you're not telling me this. You're not telling me that you guys..." I said, "Yeah, we're engaged."
Hello?
There's no crime in that.
Karen?
I had seen Belinda in Cannonball, and Susie had suggested her for Piranha, and we met her, and we did Piranha. And she was great and very, very tolerant of the stuff we put her through. I mean, we dragged her from the back of a motorboat with rubber fish on her, and I mean, it was like, what a trooper. And she was wonderful and very charming and natural. And so when it came time to do the Howling, there was this sort of second banana character who, of course, gets killed. And there was obviously this was the girl. I mean, she gets killed in almost every picture she makes. She's perfect for this.
Hello, Eddie.
Bob Picardo was another discovery of Susan Arnold's, and the audition scene that we did was the scene in the booth.
Can I turn around and see you?
Bob came in and did this reading with Susan playing the character.
I sat her in a chair, and I got behind her and would not let her turn her head and look at me, and I just came right over her shoulder. I think the reason I was hired was I creeped her out.
I'm gonna light up your whole body, Karen.
It was immediate that this guy was, great. He was a terrific actor. And he had one other major characteristic, which was he was willing to sit still for Rob Bottin to cover him with latex and all that other stuff that he does for hours and days.
Sun worshippers, moon worshippers, Satanists, the Manson people used to hang around here and shoplift.
The Howling got me a little pissed at first because he said, I got your day's work on the picture. I said, that's all there is? That's all it is? You don't fit in. You don't look like a werewolf. You don't look like, forget it. I said, all right, take the day's work. And we got down there, and it started to become my favorite part.
Crazy fuck.
And to this day, it is still my favorite part with 150 pictures behind me.
Dick Miller is in all the movies that I do.
You name it, I got the book.
Every time I read a script, it's like, you read the script and you try to figure out what you want to do with it or if you want to do it, and then there's that other nagging question, where's the part for Dick Miller? Because if there isn't one, well, how can I do this?
Okay, guys, this is it.
The very first thing we shot on this movie was the porno film, because that had to be finished so we could use it in the projection booth.
Mike Fennell and I went into my garage and shot a fake porno movie. And this very nice girl came, whose name I can't remember. And we had two production assistants who put on like stocking masks and stuff, and we had this, we brought in this bed, and we basically shot a silent porn film. It was kind of uncomfortable doing it. It wasn't like a lot of fun. You'd think it would be, but it wasn't. It was kind of creepy.
The girl from Kansas going into the porno theater was not real comfortable. I mean, I just, ew.
It was a real porn shop. I mean, we didn't have to bring anything in. We just had to hide the things that you couldn't put in a movie. So lots of little pieces of tape and price tags on the appropriate parts. And I don't think she wanted to go in there. I mean, I remember Joe trying to talk her in, and she went in with her, hands over her eyes so she wouldn't see these evil things.
The unease and discomfort that you see was real. She literally couldn't look at anything.
In the film, she enters and she goes through and she's very nervous about everything, and the camera sort of leads her, and she goes back to that booth, and that's basically the way we shot it. She really was ready to flip out when the little porno film was playing and Eddie the Mangler is sitting in the shadows.
Parker.
The one thing I like about Joe is that he's very loyal, and he tends to use the same people in movie after movie.
I mean, I like character actors, and I also like to work with my friends. So by the time I had gotten to the point of doing The Howling, I had already worked with Kevin McCarthy, so I asked him to be in the picture.
Get her ready for the 11 o'clock report.
There's been a lot of talk. Now there is a pro.
And obviously Dick Miller and Bob Picardo, who we worked with the first time on this movie.
See, I like to put the writer in the movie if possible, for a couple of reasons. One, it's nice to have the writer on the set whenever possible. And if you're on a location, chances are, they're not going to want to fly him there. But if you hire him as an actor, you can sort of make a case for it.
Only thing that freaked me out since I've been working here is the night old Stu Walker came in.
I think the picture took about 28 days to shoot, and then there may have been 4 days of reshoots.
The story and the budget both sort of dictated the look to the film.
There were some locations in Mendocino, beautiful locations, which we couldn't afford to stay in very long, so we shot the heck out of them.
It was freezing cold up there, and by the second day I was running this fever. So most of the shoot up there in the Werewolf Land, I was in a haze. I mean, I don't know how I ever actually read my meter because I was just delirious. But, you know, I guess that added to it.
All the shots inside that little shed, it was really just John and I in the shed. And so, you know, you're just working off your own imagination. Joe wasn't even there because nobody else could fit in the shed besides John, the camera, and myself.
Belinda, I believe, goes to a cabin, and then she runs through the woods, and then she runs up to another door, and then she goes into it. One place was, I think, in Mendocino County, and a month later we were we shot the interior where she arrived on a stage, and then the portion where she ran was in Griffith Park on another night, and then the cabin she ran to was somebody's house that we just spotted along the road up in the mountains. Nobody was home, and we just set up and shot it.
We had a production designer named Bob Burns, Robert Burns, who had been the production designer on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I think had a great deal of influence on the success of that movie, because I didn't realize until I went to Bob's house how much of the decor of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had actually come from the mind of Bob Burns. He was good at regular stuff too, but he brought a certain queasiness to the props and stuff that we had, and the idea of Marcia's cabin and the way she lived, and you know, with dead animal skins and bones and stuff. I mean, Bob just ate that stuff up.
Where is he? He was here this morning.
And it changed my life, I got to tell you, to work in a real morgue. And we were guaranteed that it was going to be empty. It was going to be just empty, you know, containers. And when we got there, it was filled. There was only 2 left, and they were waiting for what they call a delivery. So we had to sit there for hours until another cadaver came down, another body. And they stuck it in, and then we had ours, which was empty, where we put our, you know, was going to be the empty werewolf one. And a day in the morgue was enough that as soon as we got it, we wrapped early, and I went home, and I tell you, I had a new view of life.
I'll cook it later.
Elizabeth Brooks had only been in one other picture, which I think is Family Plot. And I think she kicks a gravestone. I don't think she had a big part. Once we put her in the makeup and the wig, I mean, she was incredible. I mean, it was Charles Addams would have died to have her play Morticia. Of course, she's got a big nude scene to do with Dee Wallace's boyfriend. And Dee was, you know, sort of like, oh, I don't think I want to see this.
I just remember Joe coming up to me like 3 or 4 days before, and he went, so Dee, I said, what? What is it about the scene? He said, well, yeah, I was just, so are you coming to the set that day? And I said, I guess you don't want me there. And he said, well, I think it would be a little uncomfortable. I said, I think it'd probably be most uncomfortable for me. So I went drinking that night.
We were shooting at night, and it's kind of cold in Mendocino, and there's a fire, and they're supposed to, you know, make love, and so John Hora, the DP, has got these fire filters, you know, and you put them up on your eye, and it makes the fire blurry. He says, well, how about this one? And these actors are standing there, like, naked. So how about this one? I said, fine. He said, well, how about this one? I said, well, fine. You know, well, I got this one's better. And I looked down, he's got a whole box of filters. He's got 25, 60 filters. He wants me to look at every one. I said, John, they're freezing. They have to shoot the movie.
Well, I had it in my contract also that there would be no additional nudity added by anyone. 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, I walk into the scene in the barn. I think it's the first time I really find out that the colony is all what it is. I walked into the barn and I looked up, and there were about 10 ladies with their boobs hanging out. And I went, okay, what the hell is this? Well, the studio wanted more, they thought for 4 and blah. I said, I'm not shooting this. This is in my contract. Oh, come on, Dee. I said, I'm not shooting this. The crew was laughing. Now, you know when the crew's laughing at 10 women with their boobs hanging out, you've gone over the line. I said, I'm not doing it. Oh, poor Mike Fennell. Oh, Dee, don't do this. We're out of time. It's Dee. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. So they called Dan Blatt. Half an hour later, you hear his car coming through the farm, right? He goes and pulls up and goes, gets out, slams the door, walks in, looks up, and he goes, she's right, it's stupid. Put some clothes on him. Gets back out, gets in his car.
I think I would be gilding the lily to say that I had an approach to directing anything when I did this picture. I mean, I'm still just learning. I mean, there's always, no matter what mistake you make, and you say, well, I won't make that mistake again, then you make your next picture, and there's another mistake you can make that you didn't make before. In the case of Dee, who was really gorgeous, I mean, just like a knockout, she was so nice and approachable. There was no difficulty to directing her because she did take direction. The only difficulty for me was that once she would get to a place, sometimes it would be hard for her to get away from that place. Once she had reached that emotional peak, it wasn't like, okay, now we're gonna do a comedy scene. You know, it would be, she would really still be there.
You know, there's no confusion. She's not confusing me for the character once the scene's over, but while we're working together, she is definitely reacting to me.
I saw you die.
I really hadn't figured out quite yet how to be the character and then not be the character when they said cut. And so I sort of kind of was her for 6 weeks.
She was able to just be frightened by anything. There's a scene where she dreams she's being attacked. So the camera had to do a rape scene where the camera is the perpetrator. You know, she would scream on the bed and we would take the camera and just sort of like lunge at her. After that, anytime she saw that camera, she screamed. I mean, it was just built into her.
You have to screw around with your mind a lot. It takes a huge amount of energy, at least the way I work, to cross that line where you're going, this is what I think I ought to do in this scene, and this is how I'm going to act it out, and go, okay, I'm just going to be there. This guy's really going to turn into a werewolf.
In the emotional scenes, and the scenes where she had to be frightened or emotional in any way, she really got into it, and she really worked herself up into a state, but it's very effective.
She really gives the film its reality. Otherwise, it would spin off into, I think, too much silliness.
I don't remember Robert. I only remember Eddie. I remember Robert being Robert and talking to Robert and thinking what a nice man he was. But when you asked me to remember that scene, I only remember Eddie. Weird, huh?
I think it was just natural for her to be the character that she played. And I remember her saying that at night she dreamed about werewolves, that she totally lived it all the time. And if we took out the handheld camera, the Eclair that we did the rape attack with her, I mean, she just screamed. And we'd go on the set, she says, that camera isn't here, is it? And I said, no, we put it away. Because she would use all that. And she just lived, she lived as if this thing was really happening to her.
And this kind of movie, there were a lot of those emotional peaks and a lot of moments of high tension and stuff. And so as a result, I think it was pretty exhausting for her. And then, you know, she did Cujo, which must have been really tough because, I mean, every day you go into that car with that big dog and that kid and you're like hysterical. I mean, it must have been really difficult. But I loved her.
Make you believe.
That's my real scream. They were gonna dub in some kind of special effect. And I said, oh, let me have a shot at it.
The end of the film was not written the way it is. As I remember it, she is supposed to transform into a pretty horrible werewolf. She didn't want to be remembered by the audience that way, so she had to be a cute one.
I had it in my contract, you know, that I would not be seen as a werewolf.
She was very, very nervous about having to turn into a werewolf.
You know, I said I really feel like she should be vulnerable in losing her fight. And that's how they came out, what I think looks like a Bambi werewolf.
That was shot the day before the picture was printed, the day before the prints were made.
We ended up having to shoot it in our office, I think, in our production office. It was after, you know, we had John Hora come with the camera, and it was just him, and we lit it, and it was like it's like a tight close-up like this, and we shot it against the wall in our office.
That whole scene is done in huge close-ups because of the fact that there was no set.
It needed to be more of an emotional thing anyway, so the less seen, the better.
Switch, damn it!
The general technique for doing transformations prior to this movie was lap dissolves, where Lon Chaney would be sitting in a chair like this, and they would sort of pin him down so that he couldn't move, and they would change the makeup over a period of, you know, hours and, you know, maybe half a day. And they would then dissolve all these pictures, all these things together in the editing, and that would turn him into a werewolf.
We wanted to do, you know, something that people had not seen before, which is actually see the physical transformation happen.
Which was the thing that got the picture made, and which we had told Afghan Embassy that we were going to do the first transformation scene with no cutaways, and it was going to all be done on camera.
As far as whether or not I was warned about what I was in for, the transformation scene was written out to a certain extent in the script. And I'd heard rumors about this, what was new about this makeup, the sort of bladder effect, that they glued little airbags to your skin and then basically put a copy of your own skin, in other words, a latex mask that had been molded on your own face, over the little bags. Well, I didn't know that the bags would be condoms. You know, new ones, but, you know, condoms that had been glued here, and a giant, like, rubber, it was like a hot water bottle that was glued to my neck. So I didn't know that when I was inflated by the 8 assistants off camera who were just blowing on tubes and my cheek would go like that. Well, whenever they blew the tube that went into the bladder on my neck, it would completely close my throat and I couldn't breathe. No one can warn you about that because they don't know that's what's going to happen. You're doing something that's new and they don't know what's really bad about it until you actually have it on, and then you tell them what's really bad about it.
However, I remember visiting the completion bond guy who was going to fund the picture and if it went over, and him saying, now you guys are gonna make this picture with like this one werewolf transformation, right? And I said, yeah. He says, what if you can't do it? And I realized that now, that if I had said, well, we're just gonna do it, that he wouldn't have funded the picture. But luckily I was smart enough to say, well, you know, we'll have to find another way to do it if it doesn't work. And he said, that's exactly what I wanted to hear.
The look, the design of the werewolves in this movie was lifted directly out of the research that we did. There were old woodcuts. There were, you know, like 16th century woodcuts that showed this creature, this wolf-like creature with a long snout and the big ears, but standing on its hind legs.
So when it came time to try to figure out how to do it, Rick Baker, who worked on the picture initially, came up with these kind of masks that would elongate. The only reason Rick was doing our picture was because John Landis and he had been planning for a long time, supposedly, to do a picture called American Werewolf in London, and John had never actually done it. And when we took Rick out to lunch to ask him to do our picture, he said, well, you know, I really was going to do John's picture, but, you know, it hasn't happened. So, and I really want to do a werewolf thing, and I want to use these techniques, and so I'll do your picture. Well, once John heard of this, by golly, that picture was on the boards and ready to go in just a couple of months. And so Rick said, well, I have to do John's movie now. But I'd recommend this guy, Rob Bottin, who is sort of a protege.
His special effects are so much better than American Werewolves in London. They are. I don't think it's because I'm starring in the film.
In order to make these life mask things, you have to have your face encased in plaster. And it gets real hot in there. And if you're claustrophobic, it can drive you crazy. And you have to have a tremendous amount of patience because it takes a long time to put these makeups on.
There's a certain challenge and a certain freedom in acting in a mask. There's an abandon that you can have because it isn't your own face, and there's something about having all that makeup on you that can be freeing. It can encourage you to really go full out.
And I remember when we had the dailies for the first of Rob Bottin's successful effects, that there were ladies at AFCO that couldn't stay in the screening room. They left because it was too intense.
One day, in fact, we actually didn't shoot any film because it was the first day that Rob was going to do the transformation, which started with Bob and ended with puppet heads. And they went upstairs to the makeup room and didn't come down. Lunchtime came and went. Dinner time came and went. Haven't shot anything. No, it's not quite ready yet. Then he's finally ready. He comes down. He looks great, but unfortunately, everybody's got to go home because it's too late, and they're all on super golden overtime, even though it's a non-union movie. And we had to wait until the next day.
If he had a werewolf whose snout would extend, that pretty well was what that creature did. So one of the things we would do is, for example, always make sure the camera was moving, because he wasn't on a physical body that could move around. What we did when we actually filmed it was change the speeds during the shot. So the shot might start at 24 frames per second, which is normal speed, and as the action is progressing, we would maybe drop to 12 and speed it way up so it had an uncanny fastness about it, or as it drooled, we might go at a high speed, slow it down in slow motion, so the saliva would drool slower.
We experimented with so many different kind of frame rates, partly because once we added sound to it, then things that were mistakes, where something that was supposed to go smoothly suddenly popped, or if you put a bone crack on it, it looked like it was on purpose. And so, and in fact, it was better than having it just go smoothly.
And a lot of these things, we would go to the point they would break, because the rubber had a limit, but nobody knew where it was till you broke it.
It was really a process of discovery for all of us. And as I said, I would probably edit the sequence a little differently now than it is, because there was a lot of pressure from the company to make that scene be really long. But, all told, I think it's still pretty good. Pete Coran was a friend of ours who actually did the opening title with the howling with the window that breaks and stuff, which was done for the trailer. And we all liked it so much we put it in the movie and never paid him extra, which he never lets us forget. When it came time to do the werewolf transformations during the love scene, it was quite apparent that we weren't going to be able to afford to do that in any other way than animation. And so Pete did some work on glass, which suggests a little more obviously than I would have liked that they've actually turned into wolves. And it works okay. I mean, he did a good job with what he had to work with. It's again, another case of there's no other animation like that in the movie. So it's sort of like, oh, what's that? One thing people probably don't know about this picture is that when we first shot it, we only had so much money, and when Rob Bottin didn't have a lot of money, I think he only had $50,000 to build all the werewolf stuff. So basically what he built is he built hands, and he built werewolf heads, and they look great, but they only went to here. So anytime anybody wanted to be menaced by a werewolf, and there are some stills, I think, of a scene on the phone where Belinda is supposedly killed by the werewolf, and there's this big head that comes in, right? And she looks up, and but then you have to cut, because if it comes in any further, you're going to see that it's a guy holding, the head.
We went through the budget and finished the film. We had no photography of werewolves. By the time the film was, basically the story was in the can, there was shots of basically a guy in a bear suit in the dark, and that was it. And they took the film standing on its own without the effects and showed it to the powers that be, and on the basis of that, they got the additional money to let Rob do the work that he had to do. But we had the whole film done with no werewolves, which was, a little lacking, I guess.
We had to go back to Embassy and say, listen, if you give us a couple of more bucks, we can probably do better than this. And so that whole scene where she's killed by the werewolf was done rather perfunctorily originally, with these werewolf heads and hands.
Actually, it was 3 months between shooting the movie and then they finished the werewolf, and we came back 3 months later to do all the interaction with the werewolf after it was finished. And I said to Gigi, the hairdresser, my hair's longer. You should trim it. She said, no, it's the same. I said, no, it's longer. Well, if you watch the movie, you can tell what was shot when, because my hair goes all through the movie. It's literally longer in all the shots with the werewolf.
I do remember one day being very glum when they put it was the big makeup day, and I think it was maybe the acid face where they had burned half my face off. And I'm sitting in the hallway after my 6.5-hour makeup session, ready to shoot, looking very despondent, like, oh gosh, trained at Yale, 2 leading roles on Broadway, my first movie in California, my face is melted off in a low-budget movie. And I'm sitting there with that look on my face, and Dennis Dugan comes up to me and says, Bob, next time, read the whole script.
Pino Donaggio, who had also scored Piranha for Joe, and he was an Italian composer, did not speak English. The way that we scored that movie, because we had very little money, was that, and I've never done it this way since, thank God, but we flew him over from Italy, sat down at the Moviola and spotted the movies, and we had actually Paul Bartel, who's a director and a friend of ours, speak Spanish, and Pino speaks Spanish, and so they would speak Spanish at each other, which of course it's not their first language, so it was kind of a translation of a translation, but managed to get through it. And then Pino went back to Italy and recorded the score and mailed it to us, and that was it.
When I went to cut it in, I think I left one cue out. I lost one. I mean, they came in little rolls, and I was in there putting, on the Moviola, putting them together, and I got to cue number 47 or whatever, and I couldn't find it. I don't know where it went. I don't know where it got to. I don't know what happened to it. So I had to substitute another piece of music at the end, and I think Pino was a little annoyed, and as was I, because the music was much better that was actually written for the butt part.
Margaret, look at me.
I trusted you, Karen.
We were in the looping stage, and Joe said,
Yeah, we got a kind of a dead spot right before you pull the thing out of your brain.
And I said, well, what do you want me to do? He says, well,
What would you say right before you pull something out of your, you pull a bullet out of your head? What would you say before?
and I go, I don't know. And then I said, I want to give you a piece of my mind as a joke, expecting him to laugh. He goes, okay, do that. Which is how so many of Joe's classic moments come about. He goes, all right, do it. You know?
I want to give you a piece of my mind.
Of course, you won't be using my, you'll be dubbing my Joe Dante impression with his real voice, right? So he won't have to hear this. Joe, you know I love you. But he does an impression of me, which is equally insulting, so why should I worry?
Well, the nice thing about making a horror picture for me as my first pictures was that I didn't have to do any research. I didn't have to do any homework. I had spent my whole life watching these kind of pictures. I knew what I liked about them. I knew what I didn't like about them. I knew what worked and what didn't work. And that I had a lot of affection for them. And I tried to get that affection to come out off the screen toward the audience. And so there's a lot of nods in those pictures to earlier movies.
Joe is one of the first directors, movie brat directors who knows so many movies that it's effortless for him to refer to them in his work and to make them a constant source of added enjoyment for a knowledgeable moviegoer. However, his films are completely enjoyable by the 15-year-old who doesn't get any of the references.
Joe loves movies. He absolutely loves movies. I mean, you can't go to his house without him sitting you down and showing you a screening of something or another.
You were enthused by his enthusiasm for the material.
I find it interesting to comment on the movie within the movie. I mean, while you're watching it, so that you get the experience of watching the movie, but you also get a sort of an editorial judgment on what the filmmakers think of the movie and the material and the movies that have gone before. And
I think he takes the old movies and adds the humor to it. And I think that's what makes him so unique and wonderful.
Almost every character in the movie is named after a director of a werewolf movie. George Wagner with the Patrick Macnee character, and the head of the TV station, played by Kevin McCarthy, is Freddie Francis. And Lou Landers is the anchorman, and the John Carradine character is Earl Kenton. So yeah, it was a real inside kind of thing.
I'll get our people to cruise west of.
Boy, there's a lot of flotsam and jetsam out tonight, isn't there? Seems like there's more of them every time we get out here.
we sort of decided to make the picture look like it was an urban crime movie for the first part, and in fact got the distributor, AFCO Embassy, to sort of soft pedal the werewolf stuff in the advertising to make it look more like a slasher movie, which were actually pretty popular at the time. And the part of the fun was that people really didn't know it was a werewolf movie for the first couple of weeks when it came out, and it was a surprise. It's a hit. It certainly surprised me.
I will never forget the screening of The Howling. I sat there in shock at the audience that went like a roller coaster, laughing, screaming, all the way through the entire movie, and I was in shock. I had never witnessed an audience interaction like that.
I went to the preview in New York, and I remember they were running it in one theater downstairs and another theater upstairs. And there's a scene in the picture where Belinda Blasky is at a the chest of drawers, and this werewolf hand comes in with a piece of paper. And I had never thought that it was going to be such a big deal, but there was like this scream. And I thought it was a fluke, and I went back, so I went upstairs where the picture was staggered a little bit, and they screamed exactly the same way in exactly the same place.
Well, I do a lot of horror films, but I don't watch a lot of them. I get scared.
Get out of here! I was the only one that screamed at the screening when the dog jumps in the window at me, and I was in the shot.
Sometimes you do stuff on instinct. I mean, you really direct movies on instinct, and your instinct is that this is the correct way to do it, and sometimes you can't even explain why, but it just seems the right way. And it's kind of validating when you actually go to the movie and you see that whatever it is that you had intended, or even not intended, is exactly what it should be.
I think it's just a bloody good horror film.
It just releases your imagination, you know? I mean, there's so much fun. You're not personally involved, really. You're sort of into a fantasy land, so you can just fly with it.
People stop me all over the world about The Howling. It has a huge following.
It works completely as a horror movie in that it has many great scares in it, and it's moody. And you know, it gets you to pop out of your chair a number of times.
Joe didn't manipulate you, he really scared you.
Bill, wake up, there's something out there. Outside, something was howling.
The other films that I know of around that time that did werewolves that had more money don't seem to have quite the magic to them.
I was and am a firm believer that you can scare people a lot more easily when they're relaxed. And the audience's first inclination when they go into a horror picture is that they're going to have fun. And so there's a lot of laughing, and there's a lot of making fun, and there's a lot of talking at the screen, don't go there, don't go in there, don't open that door. Because people basically go to get scared for the same reasons they go on a roller coaster. I mean, it's a safe kind of high without having to actually be in danger.
You know, sometimes really talented people just do their own thing. And I think the fans totally get that.
My deal on this picture was they paid me, I think, $1,000 to direct it. And there was a pretty bad period after The Howling that I didn't work at all because the company changed hands. And Norman Lear bought it and decided he didn't want to make this kind of picture anymore. He wanted to make, you know, something a little classier. And so the project that I'd been working on, the Philadelphia experiment, which I've been working on for not much money for almost a year, was canceled. And I was down to my last $500 after having made 2.5 pictures, just to show you people out there that it's not as easy as you think.
Having made The Howling and having had people go pay money to see it just opened up all sorts of doors for everybody.
Ultimately, I think it probably led to me directing Gremlins because I was sent that script in the mail.
Unbeknownst to us, Steven Spielberg saw the movie and was a big fan of it, which we didn't find out until we got a script in the mail, which was Gremlins.
Just like came in the mail, I thought it would come to the wrong person. I said, Steven Spielberg sending me mail? What for?
In fact, Steven hired Dee Wallace to star in E.T., so he obviously liked the movie a lot.
I remember the day when my Star Trek producer, Brannon Braga, discovered that I was Eddie Quist. He had no idea. You know, I've been working with him 2 years on Star Trek Voyager, and he didn't know that and someone told him that I was Eddie in The Howling. And I think that he finally went, wow, there's more to this guy than I knew. Let me write an episode. Shortly after that, we did a Jekyll and Hyde episode on Voyager.
The ad campaign was a claw ripping through a screen or something, and then behind it is a woman screaming. And it was a pretty provocative image. And I think the ad line was, "Imagine your worst fear or reality," which is pretty vague, but still interesting. And nowhere says Wolfman or werewolves or anything.
We thought it was great because it was suggestive without being blatant, and we didn't want to give away what the werewolves looked like. It was a very subtle, kind of tasteful, classy campaign, we thought.
It was arresting enough image to get people talking, and it was used all over America, but in Europe, oddly, they took the same idea, but they put a big wolf snout sticking out instead. And I think that's what's on the cover of your DVD, come to think of it. And I think the other one's better. I think the other cover is better. Don't use that one. Use the one with a girl. The Howling did well enough to spawn a sequel, although if for whatever reason it wasn't made by Embassy. I don't think I probably would have been in the running to do that because Gary Brandner, who wrote the book, was not a big fan of mine. And he was controlling the rights at the time. And so they went to Europe and made Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf, which was fine with me. I mean, okay, great, make a sequel.
Years after we made the movie, we rented a screening room and ran Howling 2, I think. And it was really bad.
Christopher Lee, who I worked with on subsequent films, the first thing he did when he met me was apologize for being in Howling 2. For some reason, it's just one of those things where it just doesn't quite come together. And it doesn't make a shred of sense from the very first frame, because the whole premise of the sequel is that no one saw her turn into a werewolf, which she did on television at the end of the previous movie and was seen by everybody. But it's a big secret in the second movie. So, oh no, don't tell anybody about that.
And that was the last one that I saw. I didn't see any of I think there's been 7 of them or something, but that was the only one we saw. It was really bad. And, most of them were made, in Czechoslovakia or whatever.
Then there was Howling 3, which was the marsupials, which was the weir kangaroos or whatever they were. And then there was Howling 4, which I think took place in a castle. And then I lose track. Then there's Howling 5, 6, 7.
The Howling was made for very little money, as you know, and is a good-looking movie that stands up 20 years later on a very small budget. Now you couldn't even make, you couldn't even do the makeup effects for 5 times the budget of the whole film.
If you were going to make this picture today, for the first time, you would be doing CGI effects up the wazoo, and you would be having as many werewolves as you could possibly fit on the screen at any one time, and they would be doing awful things to everybody, constantly.
I think every generation needs its werewolf movie, so I think maybe we're ready for another one.
Well, The Howling has always been one of my favorite movies that I've made because it was the first good movie that I made, and I just sort of gravitated toward that kind of movie.
The films that Joe and I have worked on that probably are going to be the ones that referred to in the future are The Howling and the original Gremlins. And both of them, kids scream and yell through the whole film.
I think it's a lot less dated than some other movies from that era, certainly. And certainly the sensibility and the sense of humor is very hip and contemporary.
I talked to a lot of people who are now in their, mid-30s who saw The Howling at 14, 15, 16 years old, and I think that's the peak moment, especially for a young male, to see that movie and really like it.
It's, you make a lot of movies if you're lucky, and they're all your kids, that's what they say, and you even love the ugly ones, which you do. But this one is one of the rare cases where everything sort of fit together and came out right. How long is this documentary?
I don't remember the question, actually.
Want to hear it?
You better ask me questions like, how long did the makeup take and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so much fun.
That's it.